My husband suddenly left me saying he's a failure. Then I discovered he'd been lying for months about losing his job and faking his dad's heart attack. 2 months later, he called from a treatment center with a shocking revelation. I, 28F, never thought I'd be writing something like this. My husband, Ethan, 30M, walked out on me 3 days ago saying he's a complete failure and that I deserve better. We've been married for 3 years and together for 7. I'm still in shock and completely lost. Ethan and I met during our sophomore year of college. I was struggling with calculus, and a friend suggested I go to the math tutoring center. That's where I met Ethan. He was this quiet, thoughtful guy who could explain complex concepts in a way that actually made sense. I started going to the center more often, partly for help with math, but mostly to see Ethan. It took months of awkward flirting before we finally started dating. Ethan was brilliant but shy, always doubting himself despite being top of his class in computer science. I was more outgoing, studying marketing and involved in a bunch of clubs. We balanced each other out perfectly. After graduation, Ethan landed a job at a rising tech startup while I went into advertising. The first few years were a whirlwind. Ethan was thriving at work, quickly becoming one of the lead developers. He'd come home excited to tell me about his latest projects, his eyes lighting up as he explained things way over my head. I was so proud of him and made sure he knew it. I remember our first apartment, this tiny studio with barely enough room for a bed and a desk. But we were happy. We'd stay up late dreaming about our future, the house we'd buy, the family we'd have. Ethan would sketch out designs for apps he wanted to create someday. 3 years ago, we finally had enough saved for a down payment on a small house in the suburbs. It needed work, but it was ours. We spent weekends painting and fixing things up, laughing at our terrible DIY skills. It was during one of those painting sessions that Ethan proposed, covered in paint, down on one knee in our half-finished living room. It wasn't glamorous, but it was perfectly us. The wedding was small but beautiful. Ethan's vows made everyone cry. He talked about how I believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. How he promised to spend every day trying to be the man I saw in him. After the wedding, things seemed to be falling into place. Ethan's company was growing fast, and he was taking on more responsibility. I had just landed a big account at my agency. We started talking about trying for a baby in the next year or two. But looking back, I see the signs I missed. About a year ago, Ethan got a promotion to lead a major new project. He was excited but nervous. It was a big step up. The hours got longer, the stress piled up. He'd come home exhausted, often working late into the night. I tried to be supportive, making sure he ate properly, giving him space when he needed to work. But slowly, the Ethan I knew started to fade. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. The excited chatter about his projects turned into one-word answers. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd brush it off, saying he was just tired. Then 2 months ago, Ethan's dad had a heart attack. It was mild, and he recovered quickly, but it shook Ethan badly. He and his dad had always had a complicated relationship. His dad was old school, never quite understanding Ethan's passion for computers. There was always this underlying tension, like Ethan was constantly trying to prove himself. After the heart attack, Ethan insisted on handling everything. Medical bills, follow-up appointments, even remodeling his parents' house to make it more accessible. I offered to help, but he said he needed to do it himself. He started going to his parents' house every weekend, coming back looking more drained each time. Work stress, family stress. It was all piling up. I suggested he talk to someone, maybe take some time off. But Ethan just retreated further into himself. The final straw came last week. Ethan had a big presentation for the project he'd been killing himself over. He was nervous but prepared. That night, he came home looking shell-shocked. When I finally got him to talk, he said the presentation had been a disaster. The client hated their ideas. His boss had berated him in front of everyone. I tried to comfort him, tell him it wasn't his fault, that these things happen. But it was like he couldn't hear me. He barely spoke all weekend, just staring at his laptop, frantically typing. Then Monday morning, I woke up to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, bags packed. The look in his eyes, I didn't recognize the man sitting there. He told me he couldn't do this anymore, that he was a complete failure. At work, with his family, as a husband. That I deserved someone who could actually take care of me, not a disappointment like him. I was stunned. I tried to tell him how ridiculous that was, how much I loved him, how none of that mattered to me. I begged him to talk to me, to let me help. But he just kissed my forehead and walked out the door. I'm heartbroken and confused. This isn't the Ethan I know. He's always been quiet and a bit insecure, but also steady and loving. To see him crumble like this, I don't know what to do. I've tried calling and texting, but he's not responding. His brother says he's staying with him, but won't talk to anyone. Part of me is angry that he'd just walk out on our marriage without even trying to work through this. 7 years together and he can just walk away? But mostly I'm worried sick about him. This behavior is so out of character. I'm afraid he might do something drastic. I know I should probably give him space, but it's killing me to just sit here and do nothing while the man I love is suffering. Should I try to see him? Give him time? I feel so helpless. Our house feels so empty now. Last night, I found one of Ethan's old sketch pads, full of app ideas and little love notes he used to leave me. I broke down crying, wondering how we got here. How did my brilliant, loving husband turn into this person I don't even recognize? I'm lost and scared and could really use some advice. Has anyone dealt with something like this before? How do I help someone who doesn't want to be helped? Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since. Ethan left and things have only gotten more complicated. I finally managed to talk to him yesterday and, well, I'm still trying to process everything. After a week of radio silence, Ethan's brother Max called me. He said Ethan was in a really bad place and had finally agreed to meet me. When I got to Max's place, my heart broke. Ethan looked awful, like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. His eyes were red-rimmed and he couldn't seem to look at me directly. We sat down in Max's living room, the silence heavy between us. Finally, Ethan started talking. What he told me left me reeling. Turns out, Ethan's been lying to me for months. He lost his job 5 months ago. That big promotion never happened. He'd actually been demoted due to performance issues and then let go a few weeks later. The company was downsizing and Ethan's project had been cut. Ethan said he was too ashamed to tell me. He'd leave every morning pretending to go to work, but was really going to a coffee shop to job hunt. Some days he'd just drive around aimlessly, too depressed to even try. He burned through our savings trying to keep up appearances, even taking out a personal loan. I was stunned. How could I not have noticed? But Ethan had always handled our finances, insisting he enjoyed doing it. I realized I hadn't looked at our bank accounts in ages, trusting him completely. It gets worse. Remember that heart attack his dad had? Ethan made it up. His dad is fine. Confused why we haven't been visiting lately, but otherwise healthy. Ethan invented the whole story to explain his mood and absence. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. The man sitting across from me was a stranger. The Ethan I knew would never lie like this, especially not about his father's health. It felt like every memory of the past few months was being rewritten. When I asked why, Ethan broke down completely. Between sobs, he tried to explain. He said he felt like a failure for losing his job, that he was terrified of disappointing me, of not being the successful husband he thought I deserved. Each lie snowballed into another until he felt trapped. He talked about the pressure he'd always felt, from his dad who never quite approved of his career choice, from his own expectations of being this tech wunderkind. He said he'd always felt like an imposter at work, constantly afraid of being found out. When he actually lost his job, it confirmed every fear and insecurity he'd ever had. The final straw wasn't a work presentation, but a call from the bank about missed loan payments. Ethan said he realized then how deep of a hole he'd dug and couldn't face me. He felt like he'd failed at the one thing he was supposed to be good at. I'm still reeling from all of this. On one hand, my heart breaks for Ethan. The pressure he put on himself, the shame and fear he must have been carrying. I can't imagine how isolating that must have felt. I keep thinking about all the times he seemed off, and I didn't push harder, didn't see how much he was struggling. But I'm also furious. We're supposed to be partners. How could he lie to me for so long? About so much? I keep thinking about all the times I comforted him about his dad or asked about his day at work. Every conversation feels tainted now, and the financial stuff terrifies me. We'd been saving for a house, talking about starting a family. Now I have no idea where we stand. Are we in debt? Did he gamble it away? I'm afraid to even look. Ethan begged for forgiveness, said he'd do anything to make it right. He swore he'd never lie to me again, that he wants to be honest about everything. He said he realizes now that he needs help, that he can't keep going like this. I told Ethan I needed time to think. I'm staying with my sister now, trying to sort through my feelings. Part of me wants to help Ethan, to be there for him like I promised in our vows. I remember how supportive he was years ago when I was struggling with anxiety about my career. He never judged me, just held me and promised we'd figure it out together. Don't I owe him the same? But another part feels betrayed beyond repair. How can I ever trust him again? Every time he says he's going somewhere or doing something, will I be wondering if it's another lie? I'm also terrified about our future. Even if I can forgive the lying, the financial damage might be irreparable. We're approaching 30. Weren't we supposed to be settling down, starting a family? Now, it feels like we're back at square one, or worse. I don't know what to do next. Do I try to forgive him? Is there any coming back from a betrayal this big? Has anyone been through something similar? I feel like I'm drowning and I don't know which way is up. I'm scared to tell my family and friends the whole story. They all love Ethan. How do I explain that the person they know doesn't really exist? That I didn't really know him either? I find myself oscillating between anger and grief. One minute I'm furious, wanting to scream at Ethan for throwing away everything we built. The next I'm looking at old photos, missing the man I thought I knew so well. I haven't taken off my wedding ring. It feels wrong to wear it, but even more wrong to take it off. Like I'd be giving up if I did. I feel so lost and alone. Any advice or support would be deeply appreciated. Has anyone's relationship survived something like this? How do you start to rebuild trust when it's been so thoroughly broken? Update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and I wish I had better news. After learning about Ethan's lies, I decided I needed the full truth. So I went to the people who've known Ethan longest, his family. I reached out to Ethan's parents first. To my shock, they had no idea what was going on. They thought everything was fine, that Ethan was still at his job, that we were trying for a baby. When I told them about Ethan losing his job and lying about his dad's health, they were devastated. Ethan's dad, Richard, was furious. He's always been hard on Ethan, pushing him to succeed. Finding out Ethan had thrown away his career, Richard's words, sent him into a rage. He started ranting about how Ethan had always been weak, how he knew Ethan would screw up eventually. He brought up old stories, how Ethan had wanted to quit the football team in high school, but Richard had pushed him to stick with it. How Ethan had initially wanted to study art in college before Richard convinced him to go into computer science. I was taken aback by Richard's reaction. Is this the kind of pressure Ethan grew up with? No wonder he was so terrified of failure. I found myself defending Ethan, trying to explain about the layoffs, but Richard wasn't hearing it. He just kept going on about how Ethan had wasted his potential. Ethan's mom, Sandra, was more concerned about Ethan's well-being. She wanted to rush over to Max's place immediately. I managed to convince her to wait, worried that overwhelming Ethan might push him further away. Sandra shared some stories about Ethan as a kid, how he was always so sensitive, taking every criticism to heart. She said she'd always worried about him, but Richard insisted that toughening him up was for his own good. Next, I talked to Ethan's brother Max. He admitted he'd known about the job loss for a couple months. Ethan had sworn him to secrecy, promising he'd tell me soon. Max said he'd been trying to convince Ethan to come clean, but Ethan kept putting it off, saying he just needed a little more time to find a new job first. I was hurt that Max had kept this from me, but I understand he was in a tough position. Still, I wish he'd told me sooner. Maybe we could have avoided this whole mess. Max apologized profusely, saying he felt guilty every time he saw me. He talked about growing up with Ethan, how Ethan had always been the golden child, brilliant but constantly anxious about living up to their dad's expectations. The real bombshell came when I spoke to Ethan's sister, Lily. She revealed that Ethan has a history of what she called extreme avoidance when he feels cornered. Apparently in college, Ethan had a similar meltdown. He'd failed some classes but hid it from everyone, even faking report cards. It all came crashing down eventually, and Ethan had to take a year off to recover. Lily said their parents had hushed it all up, not wanting anyone to know their perfect son had stumbled. She thinks that just reinforced Ethan's fear of failure, teaching him to hide his struggles rather than face them. I was floored. How could Ethan have hidden this from me? We've talked about our pasts so many times. I thought I knew everything about him. Finding out about this college incident made me question every story Ethan had ever told me about his past. Lily also let slip that the family has a history of mental health issues that they don't talk about. Their grandfather had severe depression, and there were rumors of suicide attempts. Ethan had always insisted his family had a clean bill of health when we discussed medical history. All these revelations left me reeling. I felt like I was putting together a puzzle, but the picture it was forming wasn't one I recognized. Who was this man I'd married? How much of what I knew about him was real? I confronted Ethan about everything I'd learned. It didn't go well. Ethan was furious that I'd gone behind his back. He accused me of betraying his trust, of turning his family against him. He said I had no right to dig up old history or share his personal struggles with his parents. I tried to explain that I needed answers, that he'd left me no choice by lying for so long. But Ethan wasn't hearing it. He started throwing out accusations, that I never really trusted him, that I'd always thought he wasn't good enough. He brought up old arguments, twisting my words in ways I didn't recognize. It turned into a screaming match. I said things I regret. He said things I'm not sure I can forgive. It ended with Ethan storming out of Max's house. I haven't heard from him since. Max says he came back to grab his things but won't tell anyone where he's going. I'm at a loss. Every time I think I'm starting to understand the situation, new information comes to light that changes everything. I feel like I never really knew Ethan at all. I'm angry, heartbroken, and honestly a little scared. If Ethan has been hiding mental health struggles all this time, who knows what he might do now that everything's fallen apart? I keep thinking about what Lily said about their grandfather's depression. What if Ethan does something drastic? At the same time, I'm struggling with my own feelings of betrayal and doubt. I've started questioning every memory, every conversation we've ever had. Was any of it real? Did Ethan ever truly trust me? Or was he always hiding behind this perfect facade? I want to help him, but I also need to protect myself. I've frozen our joint accounts and I'm meeting with a lawyer next week to understand my options. I hate that it's come to this, but I don't know what else to do. The thought of divorcing Ethan makes me physically ill, but staying in this limbo is slowly destroying me. Ethan's family is divided. His mom calls me daily, crying and begging for updates. His dad oscillates between rage and dismissal, saying Ethan just needs to man up and come home. Max is caught in the middle, trying to support everyone. Lily is the only one who seems to truly understand the gravity of the situation. My own family and friends are worried sick about me. They keep telling me to forget Ethan, that I'm better off without him. But they didn't know him like I did, or thought I did. They didn't see his gentle side, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his dreams, how he could always make me laugh even on my worst days. I find myself going through our house, looking for clues I might have missed. I found an old journal of Ethan's from college full of dark thoughts and self-doubt. How did I never see this side of him? Was I so blinded by love that I ignored the signs? I'm trying to take care of myself, but it's hard. I can barely eat or sleep. I've had to take a leave of absence from work because I can't focus on anything. Every time my phone rings, I jump, hoping it's Ethan, but dreading what I might hear. I keep replaying our last fight in my head, wishing I had handled it differently. Maybe if I had been calmer, more understanding, he wouldn't have run off. But then I remind myself that this isn't my fault. Ethan made his choices. He lied. He hid things. He broke our trust. Still, I can't help but worry about him. Is he safe? Is he taking care of himself? Does he regret leaving, or is he relieved to be free of the pressure? I don't know what the future holds. Part of me hopes Ethan will come back, that we can work through this together. Another part knows that even if he did, things could never be the same. The foundation of our relationship has been shattered. Has anyone dealt with a spouse hiding mental health issues? Or compulsive lying? How do you even begin to rebuild trust after something like this? Can a relationship survive this kind of betrayal? I'm so out of my depth here. Any advice or support would mean the world right now. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of uncertainty, and I don't know which way to swim. Update 3. It's been 2 months since Ethan disappeared and a lot has happened. I'm not sure where to even begin. About 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ethan, calling from a treatment center 2 states over. He sounded different, calmer, but also fragile somehow. Ethan said he'd checked himself in shortly after our last confrontation. He's been diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety, with some traits of borderline personality disorder. The doctors think he's been struggling with these issues for years, but has been hiding it from everyone, including himself. He's on medication now and in intensive therapy. Ethan says he's finally confronting a lot of childhood trauma. His dad's constant pressure, feeling like he always had to be perfect. He's realizing how much that's shaped his behavior, especially his fear of failure and tendency to lie when he feels cornered. Ethan told me about the day he left. He said after our fight, he just started driving with no real destination in mind. He ended up at a beach where we had our first vacation together. Sitting there, watching the waves, he said he finally realized how much damage he'd done and how much he needed help. He talked about his first few days in the treatment center, how hard it was to be honest about everything, how terrified he was of being judged. But slowly, he's starting to open up. He's connecting with other patients who've gone through similar struggles. Ethan apologized for everything. He said he knows he's hurt me beyond words and that he'll understand if I can't forgive him. But he hopes that maybe, someday, we can at least talk. He wants to explain everything properly, to try and help me understand why he did what he did. I don't know how to feel. On one hand, I'm relieved that Ethan is getting help. The man I fell in love with is still in there somewhere, buried under layers of pain and fear. Hearing him take responsibility, actually acknowledging his issues instead of running from them, it's the first step I've been hoping for. Part of me wants to support him through this, to see if we can rebuild something real and honest. I remember the good times. How Ethan would leave little love notes around the house for me to find. How he'd hold me after a bad day at work and tell me everything would be okay. The way he'd look at me sometimes, like I was the most precious thing in the world. But another part of me is just so tired. The past few months have been a roller coaster of emotions. I've cried more than I thought possible. I've had to untangle our finances, explain to friends and family why Ethan isn't around, deal with his parents' constant calls and messages. It's been exhausting. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I can ever fully trust Ethan again. Even if he's working on himself, how can I be sure he won't relapse? How can I believe anything he tells me? The thought of constantly second-guessing him, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, it makes me feel sick. I told Ethan I needed time to think. He understood and said he'd respect whatever decision I make. He'll be in treatment for at least another month, so I have some time to figure things out. I've been seeing a therapist myself to work through all this. She's helping me realize how codependent Ethan and I had become. I'd built my whole identity around being his supportive wife. Now I'm having to figure out who I am on my own. I'm focusing on myself for now, picking up old hobbies, reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. It feels good to remember there's more to me than just being Ethan's wife. I've started painting again, something I gave up years ago because I never had time. It's like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten. I've also been spending more time with Ethan's sister, Lily. She's been an incredible support through all this. We've talked a lot about Ethan's childhood, the family dynamics that shaped him. It's helping me understand him better, even if it doesn't excuse his actions. Ethan's parents are another story. His mom wants me to take him back immediately, saying he's fixed now that he's on medication. His dad still thinks this is all ridiculous, and that Ethan just needs to get over it. I've had to set some firm boundaries with them. I still love Ethan. A part of me always will. But I'm not sure love is enough anymore. I need to decide if I'm willing to put in the immense work it would take to rebuild our relationship. And if I'm honest, I'm not sure I have it in me. Some days I wake up missing him so much it hurts. Other days I feel angry all over again, remembering all the lies and betrayal. It's like emotional whiplash. I know I'll have to make a decision soon. Do I try to work things out with Ethan? Or do I file for divorce and start over on my own? Both options terrify me. If anyone has been through something similar, rebuilding after betrayal, dealing with a spouse's mental health crisis, I could really use some perspective. How do you know when to keep fighting and when to let go? Thank you all for your support through this journey. It's meant more than you know.